So the first part, I think we've covered the initial first part of the first question. And now just to expand on that, having seen the threats which are there in our neighborhood, I'm talking about our immediate neighborhood. Now, how are our armed forces equipped to meet these challenges that are there in front of us? And we fought wars successfully. Example is of 1971 war, which is fresh in everybody's mind, which was synergy between Army, Navy and Air Force to achieve the desired end state objectives. So, Commander AJ sir, can you just tell us quickly and a little brief as to how the defense forces are prepared to meet these challenges?
I'll first give you a maritime perspective. Admiral Shekhar Sinha covered the overall security scenario. And coming now to more specifics about how we prepare to tackle the security threats. So there has been a shift in the nature of the maritime security threat. So, state-on-state conflict seems to have receded into the background compared to the non-traditional threats, the transnational threats, climate change, piracy of Somalia, which, the Indian Navy tackled so well. And there is also a view that our Navy is meant for this, or our Navy is meant for war fighting. And obviously, navies are meant for war fighting. That is the very raison d'etre of the Indian Armed Forces, is war fighting. So, do we need to structure ourselves more?
Admiral Shekhar Sinha, Rajesh, they're on line.
Yeah, he's the.
Okay.
So the question is,
Sinha is what he's done is that he's just taken the video off.
Do we structure ourselves to tackle a more immediate non-traditional threat, or do we remain structured on tackling the conventional state-on-state threat? Now, the argument, the reason I'm saying this is because over the last few years, there's been a lot, I wouldn't say criticism, but there has been a comment on, do we need a Delhi-class destroyer to go and take on a pirate who's in a skiff with 4 Kalashnikov handling youngsters? Or do we need a small OPV who can do it? Why are we wasting a Delhi-class destroyer on this? But navies can't be structured in a manner where you have certain Navy forces doing something and certain naval forces doing something. So yes, sometimes you think the asymmetry is too much, but it is essential. And the Indian Navy, force structuring, now I come to force structuring, in the early 2000s, maybe late 19, and I was in naval plans at that time looking after this, we shifted our force structuring from threat-based to capability-based. Because see, the navies are long-term assets. It takes time to build a ship. The nature of the threat may change. So we must focus that we must have an all-round capability which can tackle any threat. So we can't structure ourselves for specific threats because threats keep changing. Now coming to where do we stand at the moment? Look, it's not a coincidence that in the last 4 years, despite such a major standoff on the borders, land border with China, the PLA Navy, which maintains a force of 7 to 8 ships continuously in the Indian Ocean, has never come into contact with the Indian Navy. It's not a coincidence. The PLA Navy is very, very clear about its limitations of being able to take on the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. They are the largest Navy in the world by numbers, everyone talks about that. But they still lack 3 things. One is the power projection capability, to be able to operate in what they call the far abroad, which in this case relates to the Indian Ocean. They do not have the kind of numbers still required to be able to project this power in large enough numbers to take on a Navy like the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. And thirdly, I think they still lack the confidence to be able to operate so far abroad. So despite the fact that they have 2 aircraft carriers, their aircraft carriers have never ventured beyond their second island chain so far, on a deployment, on a cruise, on anything. They've only focused over there. But that is not to suggest that they're not preparing for the future. They're already building 2 more aircraft carriers. So I am reasonably confident by 2030, there will be a very substantial Chinese PLA naval presence in the Indian Ocean, perhaps
so
a carrier
my question was, how are we prepared to tackle presently to meet that?
Okay. So at the moment, I think the Indian Navy is very well structured to meet that threat, because it's not a zero-sum game. It's not about can Indian Navy take on the PLA Navy.
No, it's not.
Indian Navy has to take on what the PLA Navy can produce in the Indian Ocean.
Indian Navy has to take on the challenges, maritime challenges.
Now, so what is China doing about it? One is, of course, building up its Navy. But what it is also doing, as Admiral Sinha alluded to, is building up its infrastructure capability in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, so
bases, ports,
Bangladesh is one,
submarine base.
is another.
Look, they've given two submarines to Bangladesh, 40-year-old submarines. But they've created a base which can berth 6 submarines. Bangladesh will not have 6 submarines for the next 50 years. So why are they there? Because so far the Chinese naval submarines could not operate freely in the Bay of Bengal, but it was just too far for the submarines to come all the way from the Chinese mainland and operate freely. Now if they have a place where they can berth their submarine in the Bay of Bengal, then after that the Bay of Bengal is no longer going to be the Indian lake, as Admiral Sinha alluded to. So we are going to have to restructure, we have to rethink our capabilities. We are very well equipped right now, but we have certain capability deficits which need to be addressed urgently. which I'm not sure is happening as urgently. Of course, money is a constraint, etc., etc. We all know that. But I think so we have to focus on certain core capabilities, unmanned technologies. We have to have, the aircraft carrier debate's gone on long enough, but I think we need aircraft carriers because if we have to be a blue water navy projecting power in the Indian Ocean as the major Indian Ocean power, then you have to have assets capable of projecting that power. Nuclear attack submarines, we don't have any at the moment. We need them as of yesterday. Ideally, we should have 6, but even if we can get 4, it will take, a nuclear submarine takes 10 to 12 years to commission. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So if we are going to prepare to take on or to be able to address the Chinese Navy's presence in the Indian Ocean, let's say 10 years from now, we've got to start working on it now. China will have 15 to 16 nuclear attack submarines by 2030. So you can be rest assured that 2 or 3 or 4 may be operating in the Indian Ocean at any given time, which severely restricts our freedom of operation in the Indian Ocean then, because we don't know where they are.
So keeping this in mind, our theatre, our present structures are adequate to meet.
If I may just add one more thing, we must not ignore how they're arming Pakistan Navy. They're giving Pakistan Navy 8 AIP equipped submarines. Now, why would a country with a 300-kilometer coastline on the Makran coast need 11 conventional submarines with AIP capability? They're giving them 4 destroyers.
Total they're giving is going to get Pakistan up to 18.
They may not reach 18 because, it costs money. I'm not sure how.
And then the older one will be phased out.
But the fact is that perhaps these will be the platforms which will be used to contain India in the Indian Ocean, as a proxy to China.
A small question. The recent events in Bangladesh, where it is said the US is going to exercise fair amount of influence in Bangladesh, does that alter the position for the Chinese berthing their submarines?
Not really, no, because we don't know what kind of presence. US is not going to set up a naval base there. They may have some intelligence facility, they'll have some surveillance capability in that island. I forget the name now, which they're talking about. Saint Martin's Island. But the Chinese already established themselves there. They have created a base, BNS Sheikh Hasina, which is a commissioned establishment. Myanmar already has Chinese submarines. So the Indian Ocean the Bay of Bengal is not going to be an Indian lake anymore. It may have a US presence in the future. It may not have a US military presence in terms of number of ships, etc. It may be a staging base. It may be all that. So we'll have to see. Because China's Malacca dilemma is another thing that has to be kept into account.
We'll keep that in mind. So now we come on to the air part of it.
Just adding on to this thing, we need to keep in mind that the majority of Bangladesh military equipment has come from China. So they are totally dependent on that for all spares and continuation of their military capability. So they are not, in preference of USA, ignoring China will never happen in Bangladesh. That's one thing to keep in mind.
So, the Indian Air Force has always been apprehension that you're not amenable to theaterization as it is. So, due to the scarce resources which need to remain centrally controlled, this has always been talked about for optimum use. And is that technically correct? Or presently too, the IF's resources in peacetime are divided into various commands. Yet the air headquarters has the ability and the control to divert them wherever required, when required. So do you feel that model will not work? How is today's model working?
Okay.
So may I have your opinion on that?
That's a big one. Okay. First of all, we've been talking about our security threats. While the capability of the enemy or the adversarial borders is increasing, so the benefit of depth which we had continues to shrink, whether it is inward into the land area or with respect to aerospace. All right, that is one. Second part is that the threats are not standard conventional threats anymore. Now they are all fusion hybrid gray threats, which are mixed, and I will just list out. One is a conventional kinetic, the LECO part, nuclear, cyber, social media, financial, AI, climate change, space, environmental, infiltration, drones, pagers, the works. So all this now comes together. Now for Indian Air Force to say that, I'm going to address only, these 2 squadrons of JF something, that's a fallacy. The threats are dynamic. And the question which you asked is, firstly, are the defense forces prepared to meet these challenges? Armed forces all over the world generally prepare for the last war which they fought. That's a well-known truism, I would say. And what the threats are so dynamic. So we have to be equally nimble. We have to be responsive and nimble. And for that, it is not only the armed forces, it is the supporting higher defense organization which gives them the authority to be nimble. Like we had this incident of, someone asking for permission and permissions. No. If we keep doing that, we will never be able to address all these threats which emerge so fast, and they have to be addressed fast. Okay, the second question which you asked, which was specifically pointed towards the Air Force, that the Air Force is somehow not in favor of theaterization. I will put a few thoughts in perspective here. The current structures which are there are the conventional structures which are basically from World War I to World War II, and not much changes thereafter. And all over the world, we stuck onto these because these were convenient. All right? And there were no major wars taking place, and we fought these 65 with little less skirmish. 71 we were successful, so we forgot how much jointmanship really took place or not. Although at a personal level, because the higher defense organization came close,
Yes.
so the jointmanship really worked. But from a structural point of view, whether it would have worked if these four people were not there, we don't know. It's a very hypothetical question at this moment. Now, what happens is you have a small cake, right? This cake is this 30 squadrons of fighter and transport and helicopter. Compared to the requirements that we have, this is a small cake. At any given time, you may say this is the number of aircraft, but aircraft are on maintenance, aircraft on servicing. The available aircraft will always be much lesser. Spares have not come. As you mentioned, sometimes spares may take 1 year to come.
Yeah, now we are reading about the problem of Ukraine and how that has affected your transport fleet, AN-32 spares, because they're not coming because of Ukraine.
It's a daily battle for the maintenance branch to keep those aircraft on line.
Like what Himachal is saying, that the case in point is specifically an AN-32 aircraft, which was being upgraded. Suddenly the Russia-Ukraine war took place. Some components and upgrade of the same aircraft were coming from Russia, and some components were coming from Ukraine. Now with the war, both have stopped.
Correct.
So the upgradation has stopped.
Yeah.
So these challenges.
Yeah, but these are the challenges which are not only specific for the Air Force, they are also challenges. The small cake is also applicable for the Navy and the Army.
Here it is slightly different with the Navy. With the current model which is being proposed of Maritime Command, it is just a name nomenclature change for the Navy. The Navy remains intact as it is. Once you have the two theaters or whatever is being talked about, Northern Theatre and then Western Theatre and Strategic Theatre Command. These are the three which are being talked about.
No, but I think we should come to this
part later. You asked me
We'll come to later. No, I asked you a very
Yes.
specific
General
question.
Rajeshwar has
That
given
how,
the thing.
because we are waiting for General Rajeshwar's comments also. So
I will wait for
You
this.
wait for that.
Because
General Rajeshwar,
we're
sir,
jumping the gun
since
here.
you've been, heading two of these important appointments as CNC of both these, so we've, set the ground. So can you tell us now, sir, what is your opinion? How are the defense forces prepared, and are we ready for theaterization? And how do you visualize as the concept of theaterization from your point of view? So what exactly do you visualize as the concept of theaterization? How should we move forward? And have we been talking for too long, since 2020 on this, sir?
Right. Thank you, Jagadbi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir, but your strength 3.
Okay. Now can you hear me?
Now I can hear you better, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right. So this debate is very critical, and I'm glad that it has gone on for 4 years. And everything good takes time, to my mind. One, are we prepared in the present form? I would say yes. Are we prepared for the future? I would question myself looking at our adversaries. Can we do better? Definitely yes. Is theaterization going to help us? Why should it be there in the first case? I mean, if things are going so well, why did we actually discuss this for 20 years? And what is jointmanship and integration? So the basic problem that a single service approach has is that whichever service presumes that it is in the lead, let us say land centric. If you're looking at the borders, then the army says we are the ones who will prosecute. Similarly, for the Navy, for maritime. And as a result, the Air Force always feels that, okay, while the air war starts earlier, but if they dominate both these, they'll be able to actually become the determinants of outcomes of victory. So what should we do? Well, since we have embarked on theaterization, and I think 4 years has been a pretty good time invested in it, and I was listening to the CDS recently, when he said that the aspect is first, getting a joint culture kicked in, which he feels is coming in the way of, at the moment, going forward in jointness and in integration. And thereafter, he feels as a consequence, theaterization will take place. But he also feels that the theaterization imperative is an imperative. Now, why do I say that theaterization should take place? My experience is that of the Andaman Nicobar Command, as well as the headquarter IDS, where we kind of supported the Andaman Nicobar Command. The challenges to that is, if I look at Andaman Nicobar as a sub-theater, the aspect which is critical is force generation. If you don't have forces which you can apply, and if they are not ready, especially when Andaman Nicobar is 700 nautical miles away, it will be a pipe dream to actually apply forces if they don't come in time. Should something be allocated, or should we go all the way back to headquarters and keep asking for resources? Will they come in time? For example, if you look at it, it has a double challenge. While you have the islands there, you have also a huge maritime space on either side of the islands. So when I look at that, there has to be commitment of forces, not only tri-service, there is already a Coast Guard, but also a lot of other support to counter threats. So I would feel the time has come for theaterization. If you're looking at 3 theaters, which I think is the current thought process, instead of the 5 theaters that you were looking earlier, then I would say that, dealing with our main adversaries, you have 2, one on the west, one on the north, and the maritime is an exclusive domain, which is really huge. And I agree with, my naval counterparts and friends that actually our assets are far too few. So is the case with the Air Force, actually. Now, why not only theaterization is important, it is a joint capability development, which is very, very essential. Unless you have jointmanship and integration and think together, you will always have a challenge of prioritization. The Air Marshal said, I need 42 squadrons. Somebody says, I need so many submarines. And another person says, I need the second or the third aircraft carrier. So this race will go on unless we think jointly. I'm afraid we will not be able to, answer these questions satisfactorily. So capability development, and especially keeping in mind that capability takes for big platforms or for acquisition at least 15, if not 20 years, has to be thought of, in fact, like yesterday, if not today. Only then, and then we have to decide what is our priority. Unless you look at theaters, you won't get the priority because there are overlaps already when you have a single service approach. And we have seen that we could have definitely done better in Kargil. 71 is a very good example of doing jointmanship with people who were on the field in a sub theater. It was not the entire, expanded theater that we feel we are facing, the fronts that we are facing today, where threats have actually multiplied. So that solution is good, but like somebody said, if you fight with those kind of plans, you will come a cropper, which is what you don't want to do. You want to fight better, you want to visualize better. And to my mind, the geopolitical changes have a tremendous impact. The technical changes also have a tremendous impact. To be nimble, like the Air Marshal said, is very right. So how do you do this? So big question is in theaterization, should you have forces allocated to theaters, which will be a challenge for the Air Force? To my mind, certain forces will have to be there, which are the minimum essential forces. And then there has to be a major central pool. But the big challenge, which I think, since one has been part of the, the Apex committee, the big challenge is what is the role of the service chiefs? So is the pie or the cake finite, or is the pie expanding? So that is the fundamental point why it has taken 4 years to come to an understanding of who shares, how does it work, what is a bottom level approach, can you impose it top down, who's waiting for what orders. So that is what, to my mind, is the challenge of theaterization. To my mind, it should have been done because that will give you clarity of how do we fight jointly in an integrated setup. I fully understand that our solutions will not be practical at points in time, and then we can refine it if we don't find it. But I think we must, get moving because already this is the 5th year. If you start from 2020 January, we are in the 5th year here in 2024. So how long is, good enough for us to actually kick it in? So my understanding is at least within a year, calendar year, we should, give it a green. And then we can keep refining it as we go ahead. So I will leave it here for the other speakers to join us. Thank you.
No, thank you, sir. You've given wonderful insights. Having occupied these chairs, you've got a deep idea of exactly what is to happen, how it's to unfold. And I'll just cover two things, sir. The CDS, when he was speaking in USI a couple of months ago, and he was speaking at the General Sinha Memorial Lecture that day, and he said the next orbit of military preparedness and war fighting has to be theaterization. That's what he talked about. He talked about that. And he also talked about the joint culture. He said, though different service-specific culture, we need to respect the uniqueness of each service.
That's very important.
And I think that's very, very important. And you talked of jointness integration. And on 6th of this month, September, there's a discussion held at Lucknow where the Raksha Mantri was there and the CDS was there, all, CNC's equivalent were there, and they discussed various models of theatre. That's what has come out in the press. And one of the models is 3 theatre commands, like you touched upon. One located in Lucknow, one located in Jaipur, and one in Tiruvananthapuram. So one looks at maritime, one looks at China, and one looks at Pakistan. And they talked of, Southwestern Command of the Army and the Southern Command of the Air Force getting amalgamated into these two. So, this is what the talk has been there. And after that, you touched on 2 things, sir. Both jointness and integration. And the General Ahuja in his piece, post that for VIF, he covered these 2 aspects, jointness and integration, and how we have to move forward. It was a very good articles. And then he talked about theaterization also. And when he talked is, theaterization, like you said, do we need to allocate a geographical area of responsibility? Today we have what is SFC? What was ANC? What is, things like that. They cover more than, SFC covers more than one geographical theater. And Jalpannu will ask later, how do we move ahead with as far as cyber and other space goes? The other two domains which are there.